Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and joining me today is my friend Bandan Jot Singh. He has such a wealth and depth of knowledge when it comes to product vision, the payments domain, and content creation, which is a few of the topics we covered today. It was a pure joy learning from him, and I think you'll enjoy it too.
Beyond coding.
How did you find like-minded people to build up kind of your connections here?
Yeah, I think you as a person always need to stick to certain traits you might have to build that network,
Yeah.
right? And for me, it was always about finding people I can connect with through my writings and things that I write about, speak about, write about on social media, etc. And via that, I get a lot of connections as well. So that was the de facto. You move me to any country in the world, and that would be my de facto plan.
Yeah.
to start networking and to start meeting new people. So for me, when I started writing about the same time, I mean, I was writing before, but not like professionally or out there on social media platforms. So that I started doing about 2.5, 3 years back. And that for me led to a lot of connections in the product world. And the product community in Europe is building up quite well. I mean, there are a few hubs. There's a Berlin as a hub is growing. Amsterdam as a hub is growing. Zurich as a hub is growing. So you find these hubs across Europe where the product and tech community is growing a lot. And that's what I started connecting to. So that was my first sort of a circle, but it's not a very close circle, right?
Yeah.
So it's just set of professionals who love to talk about product and tech. The second network obviously comes in via the company that you work for. So when I came to Amsterdam, I joined Booking.com, and that has an immense it's headquartered and everyone is required to work out of Amsterdam, most of their product and tech folks.
Yeah.
So that was my first closer network, people with which I spend most days, and you could also spend weekends and be together to explore restaurants or throw home parties or stuff like that. So that was my second, let's say, more closer network. And then I think eventually you figure out the people with which you want to sort of, stay in touch and keep meeting them and keep figuring out what to do next. So that basically was the addition for me over a period of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like I've heard this before, that people that create content, whether it's video form content or like written form content, when they go to a country, they already kind of know people there. I think that's such a cool like cheat code. It's like a life hack, basically.
It is. And this is what digital unlocks for you, right?
Yeah.
I would say that anyone who's exploring, I would say, countries or even their own city. I mean, cities are big nowadays, right? I mean, there's so much happening in a single city, especially in the metropolitan. So if you're out there speaking about what you like, I mean, not even content creation, if you simply post about what you think, what you like, what you do, you can attract people in the similar location that might be interested in meeting or knowing more, and you can always reach out to them. So digital unlocks immense networking opportunities.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah.
I want to get into the content creation side, but before we do that, I think I just want to put a pin on that, because leading up to that, I want to learn about how you got into kind of product strategy, product vision, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I feel like the people that I've worked with that have those responsibilities, their background usually varies in how they got to positions like that in the first place.
Yeah.
It might be
Yeah.
a project lead from a technical point of view, a project manager from a more program-oriented side, or even a BA side, like a business analyst.
Yeah.
How is that for you?
Yeah, you're right. I think, and also anything to do with strategy doesn't have very defined roles, even when people get into it. They might be approaching strategy from a business perspective, from a tech perspective, from an operations or marketing perspective. I mean, you can fit strategy word to anything and it makes sense. You can have a marketing strategy, you can have a tech strategy, right? So you're right that the roles are not defined once you get into it. But I would say when someone gets into it, generally that's decided by whatever the scope of your work is. How high are the stakes of your work? What are the risks that are involved with the kind of work that you do?
Yeah.
Because if you're in a market which is changing very fast, or your clients are changing very fast, you need to have a plan. That's certainly, we are all wired in a way to have a plan
Mhm.
that may be like 3 months into the future. What should we do over the next 6 months? And as you take up bigger, more riskier roles in the sense that you take more ownership of what would happen over the next few months, and that can come from project management, from even a senior developer or a tech lead, or that can be from product manager. You need to have a long-term plan about what's going to happen over the next 12 months or
Yeah.
18 months. And strategy is a word that you can fit into these long-time horizon thinking, and that's what strategy is, right? So, and that's why there rarely roles which are specifically called strategy roles, but you do strategy on the side while you do your main role. Right?
Yeah.
So I think strategy as a way of thinking should be something that everyone should try to sharpen and see how they can also think long term while they're doing the short term things.
Yeah. Did it grow for you organically this way as well, where you got more and more responsibilities and started thinking of a longer term horizon?
Yeah. My experiences actually started from I was working for this company called Gojek, which is a big Southeast Asian super app,
Yeah.
competing with Grab and also supported by a lot of these Chinese investments now. What eventually happened was I was in product management roles and growing in those product management roles. And I ended up owning a domain which had a huge impact on the company depending on the direction it takes.
Yeah.
And I knew that I could no longer have a non-strategic view on what the team should do next.
What domain was that?
So this is a super app, right? So you could book transportation, you can order food, you can do payments all in a single app. So imagine if a lot of these fintech and the Ubers and the Bolts and all came together and built a single app, so kind of like that. So it's a huge sort of a thing all happening at the palm of your hand.
Wow.
And the domain for me was to enable payments for all of these services. So when you take a cab from location A to location B, how do you pay for that cab? And you have a lot of options which are more specific to, let's say, preferences of Southeast Asian customers. So a Thailand is so different from Indonesia and so different from Singapore.
Okay.
So I was in the payments domain, and that's when I figured out that since the stakes are so high, I mean, payments is something which you should not worry about as a customer.
Yeah.
If you have to worry about your payments, that means the product did not do a good job of it, right? It should be seamless. It should almost be invisible.
Yeah.
When you try to do payments, right? It should be just something that you do subconsciously. It should be that easy.
Yeah. If that doesn't work, my whole trust goes down the drain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So and that's when I started seriously thinking about the long-term aspects of what decisions we take while building these payment solutions in the app. So if somebody is taking a cab, just to take an example, and you offer them two options, one is to pay instantly, and the other option is that maybe that person takes too many cabs in a day because he or she is traveling from office to home every day taking a car ride. Then they might not want to pay every single time because they're traveling too much. Maybe they want to pay once at the end of the month, so you could just club all of your bills into a single bill and let them pay by the end of the month.
Yeah.
And these two kind of customers are very different. The ones who want to pay instantly and the ones who want to club everything towards the end of the month. And it's about convenience and seamlessness. Now, how do you, as a product team, as a tech team, design things in a way that you can cater to these very different needs?
Yeah.
And then there are implications on your infrastructure, your security, your network, what platforms you build, what experiences you build. And it just becomes not so easy. Yeah.
I get that.
It can become complex very soon. And that's where my first, let's say, seriously thinking about what should be the strategy. If we do this, what is going to be the reaction of the market, of the competition, of the regulator, and so on and so forth. And that makes it multidimensional, that makes it complex. But also you need to learn on the go. You cannot have answers. So you need to know just enough in your strategic process to try out things.
Yeah.
But not so much that you think you have a perfect plan. So somewhere in between. And that's the strategic thinking part.
Yeah, I love strategic thinking. And even now, I think that product vision, product ownership is something that interests me.
Yeah.
It always has, kind of from a creator perspective, from a software engineer perspective in that team. As I hear your story, for me, the stakes sound very high because you're in a huge company. Payment is the most crucial part, as you say. If it's not seamless, people lose trust, and the whole brand recognition and the image can go down and down because of that. And then you come into a position where you say, okay, we have to experiment, we have to try things out. You're probably also learning on the go. How was it within that environment when the stakes were that high?
Yeah. I think it's something that everyone learns in their careers, right? I don't think there is a book which tells you what to do when stakes are high.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah, and I haven't found a leader as well or a mentor who can say exactly what to do in such situations. Because to be honest, there is no one size fit all in different kind of situations, and it sort of varies. And that's what makes it interesting and challenging at the same time.
Yeah.
What works in one company, and that's where a lot of this experience bias comes in. So you saw some things working at one company and you go to the second company and nothing works, whatever you learned.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the company is different, the market is different, the customers are different. And that's why I wish I had one answer. But to me, it lies in some sort of a framework you should have in a mind.
Yeah.
With more than one possibilities of the possible outcomes, right? So in the experience that I talked about for Gojek, it was always about, I can do it two ways. Either I invest so much into upfront research that I have the strongest hypotheses about what can work or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're almost always valid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then that upfront research is also a craft in itself. How much research? What are you trying to validate?
Yeah.
Till what extent do you want to validate? You cannot validate it too much, so you run out of time in the market, and you cannot validate too less. Otherwise, your hypotheses may not be strong. So that's one way to do it. And I would say companies with great market research and customer research cultures mostly go for this approach, where they try to come up with the strongest hypotheses through research and validation.
Yeah.
And then those hypotheses can become your strategic bets, for example. The other approach that I've seen in companies which do not have strong market and customer research in-house is experimentation. So you may not know which hypotheses are strong or weak. I mean, you always have a hunch, or you may have some anecdotes, and there's always some senior person telling that I know what the market is doing. So,
Yeah.
so
I know.
you can get it, right? You can get it what you can try out in the market, let's say.
Yeah.
So this second approach is more about experimentation, in which you literally throw out your best 2 or 3 ideas into the market and see the traction over the first few months or weeks, depending on what kind of product and market it is. And then you figure out, is it going in a positive direction from a metric perspective, or is it going in a neutral or a negative direction? Then you decide to stop or scale or pivot. And this experimentation approach requires a good infrastructure you should have on experimentation side, like A/B testing or whatever it is. And then there are companies in between. I've taken 2 extremes. So good in customer research and market research. The second one is experimentation. Then there are companies in between who do a little bit of both. Yeah. So when I join a company, I first look at where is this company on this spectrum. Yeah. And then what can I try out without overloading the system with like new tools and stuff, and start throwing what I learned in the previous company. So I try to avoid that and just see what are the strengths of this company and how can I build it.
I like that a lot. Yeah. I think from my personal history, I've always been more so involved with companies that did not have kind of strong market research to build up strong formulated hypotheses. Yeah. And also from the implementation point of view, I have been in projects where we built up the experimentation in so much so that we could do that. And then also be part of, for example, building features and then testing them out. The struggle I've seen there, and also I think this is just personal bias that is in there, is okay, you always have a preference for a certain outcome, right? Yeah. And if then the data sways towards a different outcome, you might be like, okay, is this the technical implementation? Did we do it right? Did we set up the experiment right? Or am I just wrong? And mostly that last part is hard to acknowledge sometimes.
It is. And I think being in companies with strong experimentation culture has taught me one thing, which is you are you are, I mean, you even if you do not do any experimentation, and let's say you have no customer research, you have a probability of 50% to be right or wrong.
Yeah.
Let's just assume that, right? And in the companies where I was doing a lot of experimentation, which was in Gojek and booking.com, more than 50% of experiments actually failed. Yeah, technical reasons, or maybe it's a wrong sample that we rolled out the experiment to, or the product or the feature, the hypothesis was wrong. I mean, there's so many reasons, as you rightly said. But it taught me that if I'm more than 50% wrong in companies where I'm experimenting, I should be really careful in companies where I'm just relying on non-experimentation techniques.
Yeah.
Because without experimentation, you tend to have some sort of confidence in your thoughts and ideas and beliefs, and I'm now just more careful when I'm trying out things in companies with let's say less experimentation focus but more research focus.
Yeah.
So it teaches you a bit.
I think that's a fantastic insight.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that even with a strong experimentation culture, that you'd be wrong. Like kind of 50% sounds, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's often actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. So I mean, it just tells you about it's this whole product and tech is not so easy, and ideas have become commodity in a way. Everyone has ideas, but who has more successful ideas that can work out is where the real thing is, and that's where we are all working together to make things happen, right? So yeah, so that's an insight from an experimentation driven culture.
Yeah, I love that. When you touched on those ideas, how do you come up with those ideas? Is that you and kind of a strategy team, or who do you involve from that idea kind of incubation?
Yeah, I think I see this as different phases of where your product is. If you take all the products in your company, depending on if you're building it for your company or for a client, you can almost map your products on some sort of a product stage. Yeah. So you could have early stage products that do not have product market fit. You can have growth stage products that have a product market fit and are getting traction. Or you can have products in like highly mature stage, right? Where it's going to get tougher because the market might be saturated, or the competition may be too high, the margins are too low, or the product is not selling, right?
Yeah.
And in these three different stages, there are very different approaches to get ideas, and one has to be really careful. If you do not take into account the stage of the product and start consolidating ideas without considering the stage of the product, you can actually end up in a situation where you're asking your strategy team or your internal stakeholders for ideas for a product that doesn't have a product market fit. Because in those cases, the ideas have to come from the customers and clients and their interactions with your product.
Yeah.
But if it's a mature product where you already know how customers react to it and there have been years of building that product, over there, ideas can come internally as well in terms of what can we do with this product next? Do we modify it? Do we change it? Do we shut it down? What do we do with it? So one has to be careful with the stage of the product. Now, if I take example of the early stage product with no product market fit, that's where the ideas should mostly come from the market and the interactions of your customers with your product. And that's where the idea should come from. So customer interviews, spend as much time in the market, understanding which clients, which customers, how do they interact with your product. If it's a digital direct-to-consumer product, then how do consumers interact with your app? What do they like? What do they engage with? And retention is probably the biggest metric in an early stage product. So you have to find what makes people come back rather than what makes people use the app. Because this is easier. I mean, you can always throw incentives for people to use the app, but what makes them come back?
Yeah.
And that's where you should search for more ideas.
Are you directly involved kind of in that research?
I think if you're in product, you should find out time to be involved in the research.
Yeah.
However, I also know it's not always easy because it depends on how the company is wired and what the culture of the company is. But let's say if you were thinking of an ideal situation, I think I would even say that the tech and the designers should also get involved on what is the customer behavior, and just to understand a little bit more as a team.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get involved on those customer research elements more and more, so that the next time you're building it, we talked about the 50% success rate. So let's not be a team which is throwing a dice. Let's be a team that knows what number will come up when we throw the dice.
Yeah, be predictable.
Yeah, be more predictable. And that would happen if in an early stage product, you're spending more time with customers.
Okay.
And this can change a bit if the product is high maturity product, then you could be getting ideas in different ways.
Yeah.
For example.
And then from those more mature products in different product phases,
Yeah.
do you then spend as much time kind of being glued to a customer, or what else do you do there?
I think as the product becomes more mature, at least the assumption is that you have worked on that product for years, or a fairly long period of time, that you understand your customers, their behaviors quite well. That's an assumption that you always take in mature products, and that's what I see when I join a company as well. And in those cases, you do not need to invest into customer research, as in going into interviews and focus group discussions.
Yeah.
Because hopefully in your company, you should already be getting daily real-time data on how customers, what are the customer complaints. So what are the top 3 customer complaints? I mean, that should already be with your customer service team for a mature product, and long enough data. You would already know what the competition is doing. So you know which features are competing, which are not competing, which are not doing well, for example.
Yeah.
So in a mature product, this is more about observing the data, making sense of the data, and then acting on the data. Whereas for early stage, you do not have data, so you spend more time with customers.
Yeah.
And in mature products, if the data quality is good and you're getting the data in the right manner, that can be a good proxy to understand customers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I always thought this might be the case, but it's very much reliant on any information you can get, right? Any data that you have. And if you don't have the data, you go close to the source, which is your customer.
Yes.
And you start talking to them to get any form of data.
Yeah, exactly.
That's qualitative. And then once you have a bulk of customers that's willing to pay, you have that product market fit, then you can rely on more the numbers, right? That quantitative data.
Exactly. And this is what happens in really, really large scale companies. Once you become a company of a size of, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 employees.
Yeah.
Of course, you'll have customer interviews being done. But for majority of the products, you have to rely on the data insights. Because you might be serving thousands or 100,000 or millions of customers.
Yeah, just the scale.
And because of the scale, you have opportunity to get data from so many sources. So that may be your app store, that may be your reviews that people leave on sites, or your customers. I mean, there's so many sources that you should probably have a good infrastructure to get the insights from that data. But it's not so easy as I'm saying it, because it's very difficult to collect data in the right manner and then clean it up to make sense out of it, right? So I know it's not easy, but that should be a general approach for mature products. Yeah.
Yeah, if that's the vision, then let's see how we can get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Have you also found yourself in an organization where kind of these information processes, regardless of the product phase, were not in place, and where you had to strongly advocate for, guys, this is basically what we need to do our job, to do my job, basically, in a correct manner.
Yeah.
This is what we need.
Yeah. I would say companies who right from the early days did not think of investing into data pipelines, data infrastructures, the whole framework that you need, did struggle towards later years. And if companies end up implementing those exercises towards later part of their timeline, then becomes really difficult to do that. So to your question, I would say I've seen more companies struggling with making sense of the data. Not because they're not getting data, but they never planned things in a way early enough to know in what format, in what sense, and how should we get the data.
Yeah.
And is it clean data or is it unclean data? And a lot of companies are just spending time in parsing the data, cleaning the data, etc. Because in the early days, they just thought they should get some customer things over email or over some sort of customer service platform, but they never planned it that maybe someday this data might be useful for us. So again, so I think now the companies are becoming more aware about the fact that data is literally the gold mine.
Yeah.
So when you start building a project or a product, you start thinking about setting up the right data infrastructure right from day one.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of companies that have been around for, let's say, more than a decade or even, 40, 50 years, the big ones, for them, it is really difficult to do it now.
Yeah, they're playing catch up.
Yeah, they're playing catch up and there's no other way around. They cannot stop playing catch up.
Yeah.
So it's about managing how much do you invest time into those elements versus the other elements, which is related to your regular business and growth topics, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting because both sides have then an interesting challenge. From playing catch up, it's hard to play catch up. You're behind, and you have to have pillars in place, and you have probably a huge amount of data because you've been established for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And then from just starting up, you want to start up and you want to do a lot. So then what is the balance in between doing enough and not doing too much? Because doing too much might slow you down. That's a hard one.
Yeah, it is. And this is where, a lot of these investments are going into your transformation activities, digital transformation, etc. And some companies take the route of trying to acquire if there is already something that's out there that can help them streamline things faster rather than building it in-house. I mean, the decisions eventually come down to two things, right? How much are you able to sacrifice or balance for the perceived benefits you might get out of this whole exercise of data cleanup, etc., versus not doing that and continuing to invest in your products and services.
Yeah.
And this balance is exactly the reason that the management and the team members, I would say even for product teams, they should have a plan and which over a long time becomes the strategy, right? Because if you're investing in your infrastructure, let's say over the next 6 to 12 months, it comes at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the cost is you might lose out on the way market is going, a competition is catching up, and that's a cost.
Yeah.
And as long as you put all of these on the table and say, okay, these are the trade-offs we are willing to take as a company, that is what is called strategy, right? Strategy is what lets you act in the right manner.
Yeah.
And that's why I always keep going back to these product strategy discussions, because exactly what you asked, these things are not easy for anyone to take decision. And we humans are wired in a way that we think about our existence in the company, how to optimize it. And we do not often optimize for the organization's lifetime, because organizations can have a longer lifetime. I mean, they can go beyond your career.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who in the company is thinking for the lifetime of the organization when most of the people in the company are mostly optimizing for their own careers? Yeah. So if you have someone who thinks I want to spend 4 or 3 years or 5 years in the company, they're optimizing for that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Highest payout for themselves.
And that is the biggest, I would say, dilemma that leadership always has, right? How do you make sure that people think for close to the lifetime of the company rather than the lifetime of their careers in the company?
Yeah.
And this is the biggest trade-off, right? In terms of how you build your employees, how do you train them, etc.
Yeah, very interesting. I think if it is a win-win, that is the best scenario, because then it goes hand in hand in a way. And the funny thing is, from a software perspective, just by virtue of doing pull requests and putting information in kind of the history in a log, I do that for myself. I do that for my team and the people that come after me.
Yes.
And that is a very much structured approach of making yourself kind of obsolete and then having enough information for the people that follow to understand what happened in the past.
Absolutely. And I was reading a few days back about some articles on strategy and innovation, and there was an interesting fact to what you said also around how to make things easier for others that come after you.
Yeah.
So in 1955, if you look at the Fortune 500 companies list, 90% of them do not exist today. So 10% of those companies exist, 90% do not.
Yeah.
And now, if you just extrapolate that to today's, let's say, the top companies, and you can do it by region or just look at Fortune 500, let's just assume that 90% of those will not exist in next 50 years.
Yeah. Wow. That's
And
incredible.
that's a big fact. And what happens to those 90% companies? You have a great team, you have a great leadership, you're all bright minds, you're thinking about strategies, and still 90% of companies stop existing. I mean, either they get bought out or they get shut down or whatever, something happens to those companies. And this is a great learning to say that over our lifetime and the careers that we invest into, right, the market is always overtakes a bit of what you think you're doing versus what the organization is thinking, because market has existed long enough, and then market changes even faster today than it existed 50 years back.
Yeah.
So the point that you mentioned, coming back to that point, small things like documentation. I mean, should we do documentation? This is such a small point for a leadership to discuss. But if the leadership is really concerned about the lifetime of the organization, they should emphasize documentation for all teams.
Yeah.
Because if you're building an organization for 20, 30, 50, 60 years, whatever it may be, beyond your lifetime, you should put in practices in place like documentation for different teams and different roles as a signal to the company that we care about the lifetime of this organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know that statistic. And then even then, knowing that statistic could influence kind of your role in a company, right? Because if you have the mindset of, all right, in 30 years, this company is not going to be this company, it's going to be different, then you might act completely different based on that.
It's very different, right?
Yeah.
And again, nobody can predict the future. So we are really saying, we are really talking about the mindset over here, right?
Yeah.
Your mindset would change, and then you do things which in a meeting you might argue about, but now if you think about long enough, they just make sense. Because of the to make a sustainable business out of the current company, there's some practices you need to do.
Yeah, I can imagine. Is that also why you've kind of been focused on staying within this payment domain? Because payments as a domain are across organizations, right? Yes. It's an interesting, complex domain, and it's complex also by region, by organization, how we do it here. And that kind of like a life skill you carry with you as you go throughout your career.
Yeah. I've been on this side where I've stuck to a domain for a long time, of course, in different geographies and different kind of companies. And I've also got friends and colleagues who have changed companies and domains every few years.
Yeah.
And while I see the benefit of the other side as well, now speaking to them, because now they experience multiple domains and they become more generalistic in their problem-solving approach rather than more specific to a domain.
Yeah.
So I do see advantages on the other side as well. But from my point of view, I think you have to eventually find out what problems are you solving for the end consumers, which are humans at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So payments is something which will never go, essentially, right? Money is going to be a key part of, exchanging value with products and services, buying things, etc.
Yeah.
And payments can take so many shapes and forms. I mean, look at the last few years, right? The digitization of payments is something that we've all seen. Some countries are leading. Some countries are still catching up with respect to digitization. So that's one aspect of payments, and that in itself is a very interesting, depending on your role and which geography you are in. When I was in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and I was, that time surprised me. It was the fourth. It is the fourth biggest country in the world with respect to population and the opportunities it has for digitization of payments. Mm-hmm. And the issue for those consumers was access to finances.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So credit demand is big. But there are no institutions that can give credit to consumers. Small credit, I'm talking about small credit, right? Not big mortgages and stuff like that. And any products that you build that can give access to credit, small credit, over a short period of time was a big win in those countries. Now, when I moved to the Netherlands, and of course I'm working across multiple countries in the Europe, access to finances is not a problem. The problem is about convenience, how seamless it
Yeah.
should be, and is it available when I need it, and should not be too interfering in my daily life,
Yeah.
which is completely the opposite of many of these Southeast Asian consumers. So payments is just a vehicle for me to think about how different people and humans interact with their payments and what they do on a daily basis. And I feel that money is something which is always central to our behavior.
Yeah.
Even if we do not talk about it, I think we're all driven by certain things which, how can I get most value out of my money? How can I save the most, or whatever may be your idea? So I think the payments domain has helped me with a lot of insights into how people think
Yeah.
in different geographies. And
Yeah.
that's been a great learning for me. And that's why I've been sticking to it, I guess, for a long time.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear that what can be challenging in a region or a set of countries is like in abundance over at other countries.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you go to kind of subsequent challenges because of that.
Yes.
Or how do you become an outlier and then kind of outperform your competition in that way? But for me, and from kind of a strategic point of view, you are very valuable within the payments domain because you bring the diversity not only within payments, but also from organizations, right? And you have that depth that is, okay, this was challenging here, this is in abundance here. Those learnings might still be applicable in then kind of distinguishing yourself.
Yeah.
I think, I'm not sure if that is unique to kind of a product leadership role, because for me, from a software engineering point of view, like I've had a lot of experience in e-commerce, but e-commerce for me, I've kind of done that. So I want to do other things as well and learn from that. Maybe it comes into kind of the people you talk to with a more generalistic mindset.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if from a creation point of view, the domain might be diverse enough or have that depth as you have from a kind of a visionary strategic point of view.
Yeah. And that's where I would say that it just depends on at what level are you contributing to the field in a way.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right? Like the set of technical challenges that existed in e-commerce world, let's say, have mostly been solved, or at least there is a solution.
Yeah.
Rather than it, you don't have to invent stuff anymore. And now e-commerce is getting automated so much with these platforms. So it's moving in a certain direction, right?
Yeah.
And then as a software developer, you would then move to new challenges that might exist in other domains, for example, right? And that's where one unique thing about product is that there are two variations of product people that I've seen. One who are more tech aligned, who like to work with the software developers, think technically, also think about scalability, reliability, and all of that stuff. So they're more tech-minded product managers.
Yeah.
But I'm also seeing a change where now a lot of software developers are becoming more product thinkers. Yeah. And that's a good change.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then I also see a shift in the roles of product managers. Now they are expected to be more market-oriented. Because if engineers are moving towards more product mindedness, then product managers are now expected to become more market oriented.
Yeah.
And that is, I would say that in my last 6 to 7 years, I've seen or experienced personally the more second kind of product roles myself.
Okay.
I've been doing that. Where a lot of my technical team members were aware enough about the problems at hand and how to solve them. With some help and guidance wherever needed.
Yeah.
But then I thought my responsibility is no more to guide technical team members on what to build because they're smart enough, and that's the change that I see in their roles now. And I have to make sure I understand the market, the competition well enough.
Yeah.
So that there's an external view and there's an internal view into what we are building.
Yeah.
And that is where the product managers are now getting closer to market and the business outcomes rather than the technical outcomes of their products a bit. And that's where, to your question, I think that has been the biggest reason that domain has become so important for product people, whereas for software developers, the domain is important, but not as much as the product people, because the product people are becoming more external focused towards the market, whereas the software developers are focusing more towards the, let's say, within a certain boundaries of product complexity, they can operate quite well as long as they know what needs to be solved.
That's an
so
interesting
it's a
insight.
bit of a nuance in how the market is evolving now.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting insight. And it might also explain kind of the ranges and experiences of product owners and product managers that I've worked with.
Yeah.
Because to your point, I have worked with product owners that were very much focused on the technical nuances, sometimes to their demise as well, where they were anchored in a solution and it turned out to be different. And then it's very hard because of that kind of tie to technology.
Yes.
And then more so as of late, I've worked with product owners and product managers that give a lot of product choice freedom to the team.
Yes.
That are like, okay, I also want you to understand the customer, right? But because of that, the product might be better at the end of this. And this is my area of expertise. And for these things, I trust you. For these things, I provide the info. And together we do this. And I think that's really cool to see that evolvement.
It's a change that's happening now also with all of the books and the authors. And, that's the kind of culture that's being encouraged in general product building nowadays. And to be honest, I think it's quite a good change, and I think it's just on the willingness of product owners and software developers to then adopt that change. That change is available, but how comfortable are you to adopt that change? That is also not easy, because I've also seen product owners who love to own the technical, not own, but they want to be a big contributor to technical decisions. And I've also seen software developers who feel too comfortable in just building the tech part of it and leave the customers and market to the product people. So as long as you're able to get out of the comfort zone, both sides, from product and tech, then this new kind of evolution of product and tech roles is what we are seeing, because people are getting out of that comfort zone now.
I think from my perspective, from a tech perspective, it's easy to gain an area of interest into how what you're building is being used and how to then do that more effectively. I think, and this might be my assumption, from a product perspective, if you've always been kind of involved in more so the technical side, to go more high over it, to think about strategically, what is the market, what is our domain, what are our competitors doing? Like that abundance of information, some people might not know where to start when that is all of a sudden kind of the evolvement of their role. I think that might be challenging. And there's no textbook for a lot of engineering leaders that I've worked with. I mean, they might not have seen that change, but now now we are seeing that change. So there's no textbook or an onboarding where you can now start making sense of this, the customers and the market. So and I completely see where you're coming from, because that is complex even for product managers and product owners. When you ask them to empower your team, what does that mean? And I see this word, I mean, there are a lot of words now being thrown around, empowerment and stuff, but what does it mean? Can you put some tangible steps to it? Can you put some tangible ideas and iterations to it? And I would love to see, I mean, there are a lot of great product authors who have tried to do that quite well, so not taking anything away from them. But I've seen that companies have gotten into this issue of saying we need to empower our teams, but they think empowerment means letting people, throwing problems at people and letting them solve it, which is never helpful, because you need to give them context. You need to tell them overall what direction we are going as a company and what are things we will do and not do. Give them some decision-making framework. And then, talk about empowerment or whatever that means in the company. And the problem is a lot of companies throw empowerment because they just want people to work out things on their own without giving them the decision-making framework. And that's always makes it so complex. I love that. Empowerment needs to be facilitated by the environment. And provided through information and kind of processes, or at least enough processes to allow for empowerment to happen in that way. Right? It's kind of a, how do you say that? I don't know how you say that. It needs the ground needs to be
fertile.
I had Dutch, like Dutch
no worries. Thank you.
For like stuff to grow in that way. I think that's a great analogy.
True.
I love learning about kind of your depth within this field, but from a domain perspective, as well as from a kind of roles and responsibility perspective. And I know you have a newsletter, you write about the content. Is that like correlated in a way? Did it get stronger, your knowledge also through kind of research and creating? And how did you start creating content in the first place? Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah. I think I would say that I've been part of this two different patterns that I saw in the social media world, right? Where it was initially a lot about your personal stuff and career and stuff like that, and then people start putting ideas about how they think about certain domains or certain skill sets, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, if we just go a decade back, we were not seeing so much content creation happening. Although, I mean, people had always had great ideas, but they just were not comfortable putting ideas onto social medias,
Agreed.
social media platforms, right?
Yeah.
And then something changed over the last 5 to 7 years, I would say, where people started actively coming out, publishing on different platforms and stuff like that. And what I predict going forward is I think everyone to some percentage needs to be a content creator as a skill set in general. And I'm not talking about like starting a newsletter or stuff like that. I think if you are serious about creating your brand and creating, attracting the right set of people, you need to start putting out something out there in the world. And today, the world is digital, so the only means is to start doing it digitally. So you can do things within your company, but to let the world know how you think, you should. I think everyone needs to be a content creator in the future. Maybe just the percentages have to be different. Somebody just spends 1% of their time, some spends 50% of their time, but people have to start putting ideas out there a bit.
Why is that?
Yeah, I think now going back to the question which you asked about when did I start and how did I start content creation?
Yeah.
I think eventually you need a bit of sparring and brainstorming about, do I think the right way? And if I think the right way, do people also acknowledge it, or do people also agree with it, or they disagree with it? And if you're getting into more complex domains, or let's say complex problems within your skill set, one way for you to get your brainstorming and sparring or intellectual enlightenment, let's say, is within your company. That's the simplest one. And I would say that if you're working in a great company, maybe that's it. You get all your ideas from within the company, you discuss them, you always learn more, you have a great environment. Then you just need to be a content creator inside your company. You don't need to put it out on the social media. Which means that you should be actively involved in whatever communities are there within your company, whatever sessions that you can do for your your team, your leadership, etc., on specific skill sets that you have. So I also mean content creation in the sense that within your company as well. So not only on social media.
Yeah.
But if for whatever reason you might not be able to get that intellectual enlightenment inside your company, then the second way is to get outside of this zone that you have. And that can be being part of communities within your city, for example, communities that you can build, if not in the same location, then probably finding communities that connect people across the globe.
Yeah.
And then the third one is obviously you can start publishing. So these are the different percentages or different levels of content creation and content absorption that you can do.
Yeah.
My problem, if somebody is not doing that at all, even within the company, let's start with that, is that are they thinking enough about their domain and skill sets? Because if somebody is not actively brainstorming and sparring about, hey, are we doing the right thing? Did we launch the right feature? Hey, this happened with the last feature, so maybe we learned something, we should try it out. I mean, everyone is trying to, in a way, brainstorm and spar about what's the best outcome we can get as a company.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, the reason I started content writing was I eventually had to get out of my network and I had to learn more to be successful in my roles.
Yeah.
It came to a point where I thought that, okay, the kind of problems we are facing in the company or the kind of problems I want to solve in the future, I'll not get enough just from my network. I need to start writing. I need to put it out there in the world to be criticized. That's completely fine.
Yeah.
Or to be agreed or acknowledged, so that I have a feedback loop about, am I thinking in the right way? Am I not thinking? So that's how I started writing, although it has changed a bit and we can go through the journey now. But I always start writing to put it out there in the world and get a feedback on, am I thinking in the right manner?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned you were writing before you put it out in the world, right? So you were already in that kind of content creation mindset. And I think people have a connotation when it comes to content creation that it's very much tied to putting it out on the internet for others to see.
Yeah.
But I think it's about the essence and quality of information, right?
Yes.
I was thinking, you said there's this trend that it's like 5 to 7 years ago, and content has been more so online nowadays than it was before. And I was thinking why that is. And one of my thoughts brought me to maybe it's the information abundance. That stuff has been more established nowadays, and there's a numerous amount of information. So then people look to, okay, where's the quality, right? Where can I find depth?
Yes.
Outside of kind of this ocean of information? Where are my little golden nuggets that are going to bring me far, either within my personal life or my career?
Yeah.
And that might be why people were creating that, because I think it might be demand based.
Yeah. No, you touched upon a great point, right? I mean, everything that works out in this world is always a balance of supply and demand.
Yeah.
Content creation would not work out if there was no demand. As simple as that. If you look at the two sides of supply and demand, the readers are looking for high quality information, and there's a lot of noise right now in content creation. Right? There are people just writing some recycled stuff, and the people who are writing original stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of noise, and readers are looking for quality. So there is demand. People want to learn more. They want to learn better. And now the learning has shifted away from that I go do a university course in the middle of my job to, can I, on a frequent basis, absorb a little bit new information or meaningful information so as to keep learning on the go.
Yeah.
And people are looking for good information, right? So there's demand. On the supply side, content creation has now become a bit competitive, I would say.
Yeah.
So when I started writing, that was 3 years back. 3 years is not a long time if you look at the overall horizon. But 3 years, things changed so much in product and tech. When I started writing, there were hardly, let's say, 1 to 2 fellow product writers who were really doing it on a scale and pushing it out on social media and stuff. I was also doing that. And now that has gone up by 5x. I see around 14 to 15 content writers really putting it out there. And, I may be missing out on half others because they're just not part of my network. So it has become more competitive. And now the challenge for content writers is, are they publishing it to get read? Then they have to write things in a way that it gets read.
Yeah.
And that's where it's the biggest dilemma that content creators like me have, who started writing to get ideas, to share ideas. But now, if I build up a certain reader base and they expect certain kind of content from me, and that's what changes the dynamics so much. Because I never start writing to appease my readers. I was only writing to share my ideas and write about what I think about product strategy, and that was mainly the domain I stick to till date. But now I get a lot of feedback from my subscribers. I can see it in the likes and comments. What kind of content do people like and not like? And it sort of plays with your mind, right?
Yeah,
You cannot get out of it. And then you think, okay, this time I write it about this and did not go well. Maybe I should go back to writing about that topic. But then really, am I doing what I started with?
Yeah, the essence.
Yeah, that's basically now the dilemma for all content writers. Unless you blatantly say that, hey, I'm writing for my readers, I don't care.
Yeah.
If you're that content writer, then okay, problem solved, because just from a mindset perspective. But for me, it's a bit of both, and I'm still trying to figure out how much am I writing that makes sense versus how much am I writing that makes sense to my readers. And I hope both are not two different things.
Yeah, I was going to ask that because you very distinctly said, I started creating content because I wanted to, it was more so from personal growth, right? Depth in whatever you were doing at your career, and probably you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah.
And now you've gotten to a point where that is still the case. You probably still want to align in ideas and get better at what you do. And now you have an audience with expectation. And as the number grows, the expectation gets bigger. And all of a sudden, when you put out an article that people don't enjoy, then you see that in the numbers, and that might just hit kind of the confidence and the motivation as well.
Yeah.
That's a hard kind of skill.
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
A recent example a couple of weeks back was I wasn't feeling, for many months, I wasn't feeling too, I mean, we talked about this empowerment, right?
Yeah.
It's a word thrown around a lot. Some books have been written on it. So I wrote about my ideas about why, there's a trend about certain things which started as best practices. They became almost like a cult. When it came to every skill set has a cult thinking in the way that this is how you do marketing.
Yeah.
This is how Steve Jobs does marketing. That's a cult thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe in tech, now there are some great practices coming out of some leaders. So this is how the CTO of Stripe does it. Yeah. So, and this is what I call cult thinking, because people start thinking that if this guy does it or this person does it, then this is how it would work out in my company. And I wrote about this thought I had about Marty Kagan, who's the writer of Inspired and Empowered. And I just wrote about that, the intent of that book and his writings is great, but people have converted it into a cult.
Yeah.
And people should actually think for themselves what works in their company, but just use it as a best practice. And I got so much feedback and personal comments, not personally on me, but directly to me on my email that, hey, I should not write about somebody's practices and stuff like that. So this is where it is, right? In content creation now, if I write what I like to say, then I should also be ready to have the implications of that.
Yeah, to get the feedback.
Yeah, to get feedback, and that may be like not so good, but at least I'm happy that I'm sticking to writing the way I started, even after thousands of subscribers, etc. Right? So, but it's a hard challenge, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's admirable to uphold your values, right?
Yeah.
To be like, okay, these are my ideas, and that's what they are. They're not right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's almost like you also have your kind of cult following, and they expect you to behave in a certain way.
You're right. It's
like in a weird way. And funny thing is, we talked about kind of a book. There's no one-way book to kind of show you how some things are done within an organization, within product, even within software development. But the funny thing is, just by virtue of you writing about it, also people do take that book and are like, "This is the holy grail. This is the book.
Yeah.
This is going to show me how it's done."
Yeah.
And I agree with you that is not kind of how I think. That is not how I think people should think. They should use that as information, and it can kind of anchor in information bias, and they can help it form their perspective. But the context matters so much.
Always.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then to hear people say, no, you shouldn't write. That's a hard one.
Yes.
And I fully can empathize with you, because also for the podcast, people are like, oh, if you do this and this, your podcast might be bigger, might be better, might grow a bigger audience. And I really like doing whatever I want, whatever interests me.
Yeah.
And that the problem is, just my personal challenge, it's a lot.
Yes.
And I think still, if I enjoy whatever I'm doing, I hope that people will enjoy it. And that is kind of my mantra.
Yeah. And I think that's how it should be as well.
Yeah.
And I think being your authentic self is kind of getting more difficult nowadays because the feedback loops are quicker. People just tell you what they want to see, or you can see what other successful newsletter writers and podcasters are doing, and you may want to do that. But it takes a lot of effort to stick to your authentic self. Nowadays more than previously, I would say.
Yeah, even subconsciously, right? You might be like, is this is what I am, but it might be just based on anchored feedback that you got.
Yeah.
I think what helps, and this is my assumption, is just keeping your network, right?
Yeah.
Your fellow content creators, or the people within your domain, within your organization, or the people close in relationship wise, they can give you that feedback also. If they're interested in whatever you're doing, they might just be kind of your grounding point to touch base with.
Yeah. No, your closest circle is always important. I would even say personal, I mean, your partner or your family also sometimes play a role in encouraging you to stick to why you started and stick to, because I think more than anyone else, your personal circle sees why you started something. Yeah. And they see the motivations that, your professional circle might not have seen.
Yeah.
So I think it's always good to go back to your roots. And when I say roots, it mostly it's honest friends and honest family members that can tell you, hey, this is your ground. This is why you started.
Yeah.
And whenever you're too high, they can get you back to the ground and say, okay, this is why you started, right? So I think you should have a good circle. Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. When you're too high, they bring you, they ground you.
Yeah.
And when you fall down, they're there to support
Yes.
you.
Yes.
That's
Absolutely.
the best part.
Yes.
Cool, man. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah.
This was a blast.
Yeah. Amazing. I think as a fellow content creator to another, I think I really enjoyed sharing some of these nuances and just dilemmas, right, that we all have when it comes to content creation and how it connects to your careers and your day-to-day work life, right? So great conversation. Loved it. Absolutely.
Great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
One final thought. Is this kind of similar to the other podcasts you've done?
No, actually.
Yeah?
This was different. And I don't even know how much time we have spent. Completely lost track of time. And that's only a good indication. If you have lost track of time, I'm not looking at my watch. So love the honest discussions and also just being here in the moment. A lot of podcast experiences have been very virtual and not so personal, with less personal connect, but this has been great. So thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Yes.
I fully agree with you. I love the in-person dynamic. I think you have a depth of knowledge, and it was just a pleasure to learn from at this side of the table. So thank you.
Pleasure to share it. Thank
Cool.
you so much.
I'm going to round it off here. I'm going to put all Bandan's socials in the description below. Reach out to him, let him know you came from our show. And with that being said, thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.